On April 2, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump unveiled an unprecedented set of tariffs targeting virtually all trading partners, marking a significant escalation of his protectionist America First trade policy. Described as reciprocal tariffs, these measures imposed a baseline 10% duty on all imports, with steeper levies on key partners, 54% on China, 20% on the European Union, and varying rates on others like Japan 32%, Mexico 25%, and Canada 10% on energy and potash. The announcement, delivered in the White House Rose Garden, triggered a global backlash, with China emerging as the most vocal and proactive respondent. This video examines China's multifaceted retaliation, focuses on its strategic pivot to new trade alliances, and the broader geopolitical consequences, including the US's potential self-isolation and that China would lead a reformed global free trade system. Before I go further, we need your support to continue bringing you the latest news, analysis, and live information. Please give us your support, smash the like button, comment, share, and subscribe to all. In 2023, I wrote a book called China 2023, the epic of global dominance, about China achieving global dominance in 2023. That's right, China already achieved global dominance. It already happened. My book is an unbiased analysis of how it happened, the history of China's reemergence in the short span of the past 40 years. My book also predicted China's rapid high-tech revolution, Russia winning the Ukraine war, the decoupling of the world into two camps of the global South and the West. The goal of China is to bring prosperity and harmony to the world. All my predictions have become reality. This power shift has deep and far-reaching impacts on the future of humanity. Please click the links below to view my book and purchase. We need your support to continue. Back to the subject of today's episode. China's immediate retaliatory measures. China's response to Trump's tariffs was swift, resolute, and strategically calibrated. On April 4, 2025, Beijing announced a reciprocal 34% tariff on all U.S. imports, effective April 10, matching the additional 34% levy Trump imposed on Chinese goods atop earlier duties. This brought the total U.S. tariff burden on Chinese exports to 54%, a figure Trump had hinted at during his campaign. China's finance ministry condemned the U.S. action as a typical unilateral bullying practice that violated international trade rules and undermined China's legitimate interests. The tit-for-tat escalation signaled Beijing's unwillingness to back down, setting the stage for a deepening trade war between the world's two largest economies. Beyond tariffs, China deployed a broader arsenal of countermeasures. On April 4, the Commerce Ministry introduced export controls on rare earth elements, critical materials for high-tech manufacturing, including batteries and semiconductors. This move targeted U.S. industries reliant on these resources, amplifying economic pressure on American firms already reeling from disrupted supply chains. Additionally, Beijing expanded its unreliable entity list, barring approximately 30 U.S. companies, primarily in defense-related sectors, from trading with Chinese counterparts. This blacklist, which now includes firms like Leidos and General Dynamics, reflects China's growing toolkit for economic retaliation, honed since Trump's first-term trade battles. China's retaliation was not merely reactive but strategically targeted. The 34% tariffs on U.S. goods hit agricultural exports like soybeans, pork, and grain sectors vital to Trump's political base in rural America. Analysts noted this as a deliberate signal. Beijing aimed to impose political as well as economic costs on the Trump administration. Meanwhile, restrictions on rare earths underscored China's leverage over global technology supply chains, a vulnerability the U.S. has struggled to mitigate despite years of rhetoric about reshoring manufacturing. Economic context and domestic resilience. China's robust response reflects confidence in its economic resilience, bolstered by preparations for such a confrontation. Since Trump's first term, Beijing has pursued a dual circulation strategy, emphasizing domestic demand to reduce reliance on exports. In 2025, China maintained its growth target of around 5%, a goal supported by increased fiscal stimulus, debt issuance, and monetary easing announced earlier in the year. These measures, held in reserve during the cautious sessions in March, provided a buffer against the tariff shock. Experts suggest that while the U.S. tariffs may dent China's export-led recovery, Beijing's successful development of new global South market, new high-tech products such as EV, robotics, AI, solar power, focus on internal consumption and state-driven investment could sustain growth. The property crisis and slowing economy notwithstanding, China's leadership under Xi Jinping appears emboldened. Analysts like Leah Fei from Capital Economics argue that she perceives China's economy as strong enough to withstand Trump's salvos, a view reinforced by Beijing's escalation from earlier, more restrained responses. This confidence underpins China's willingness to engage in a prolonged trade conflict, betting that the U.S. will bear greater costs from global isolation and supply chain disruptions. Forging new trade relations. Parallel to its retaliation, China has accelerated efforts to forge new trade relationships, positioning itself as a reliable alternative to the U.S. in global commerce. The tariffs have strained U.S. alliances, creating openings for China to deepen ties with both adversaries and erstwhile American partners. Southeast Asia, Latin America, and even parts of the West have emerged as key theaters for this pivot. In Southeast Asia, countries like Vietnam and Malaysia hit with U.S. tariffs of 46% and 24%, respectively face diminished cost advantages from their China Plus One supply chain rules. China has capitalized on this, negotiating with Vietnam to redirect trade flows and offering incentives to maintain manufacturing links despite U.S. pressure. A notable development was Trump's April 5 social media post claiming a conversation with Vietnam's Communist Party head about reducing tariffs, hinting at potential concessions. Yet China's deeper economic integration with the region suggests it may outmaneuver the U.S. in the long term. Latin America offers another frontier. Brazil, facing a 10% U.S. tariff, passed a reciprocity bill on April 2, enabling retaliation. China has moved swiftly to fill the gap, eyeing Brazil's agricultural exports like soybeans, previously destined for the U.S. market. With U.S. tariffs rendering American farm products uncompetitive in China, Brazilian and Australian exporters stand to gain, further eroding U.S. trade dominance. Mexico, despite its 25% tariff burden, has adopted a conciliatory stance toward the U.S., but China has quietly intensified trade talks, leveraging Mexico's manufacturing base integrated with North American supply chains. Perhaps most striking is China's outreach to the West. In March 2025, China signed a 15-year LNG contract with Australia for the supply of 0.6 million tons of LNG per year. Also in March 2025, China's Rongsheng Petrochemical, China's largest independent refiner with capacity of 40 million metric tons a year, or 800,000 barrels a day, has opened an office in Canada to buy Canadian crude and made its first purchase from local producer Suncor Energy. China has become a regular bearer of the heavy sour Canadian crude. The European Union, facing a 20% U.S. tariff, has criticized Trump's unilateralism. French President Emmanuel Macron's call to suspend investment in the U.S. reflects growing frustration among allies. China has seized this opportunity, proposing tariff reductions and investment pacts to EU members like Germany and Italy, whose industries automotive and luxury goods, respectively, rely on Chinese markets. The EU's response remains fragmented, but China's overtures signal an intent to peel away Western partners from the U.S. orbit. The U.S.'s path to self-isolation. Trump's tariffs risk isolating the U.S. economically and diplomatically. The global reaction has been overwhelmingly negative, with allies and rivals alike decrying the disruption to decades of trade liberalization. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the tariffs a national crisis, while the IMF's Kristalina Georgieva warned of a devastating blow to global growth. Financial markets mirrored this alarm, with the Dow plunging nearly 4% and the Nasdaq dropping 6% on April 4, the worst single-day losses since 2020. Economists predict dire domestic fallout. The Tax Foundation estimates the tariffs will raise U.S. household costs by over $1,900 annually in 2025, reigniting inflation and risking recession. J.P. Morgan now pegs the global recession probability at 60%, up from 40%, citing disrupted supply chains and retaliatory levies affecting $330 billion in U.S. exports. Companies like Apple and Nike, heavily reliant on Chinese manufacturing, saw stock declines of 9% and 5%, respectively, as CEOs warned of price hikes. Retailers like Target and Best Buy echoed these concerns, with immediate price increases on goods like Mexican avocados and Chinese electronics. Allies face a dilemma. Japan and South Korea, dependent on U.S. security guarantees, hesitate to retaliate fully, yet domestic pressure mounts. Canada's 25% tariff on U.S. vehicles and Mexico's planned measures signal fraying North American unity. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement USMCA, once a Trump triumph, is under strain as exemptions waver. Meanwhile, the closure of the de minimis loophole used by e-commerce firms to bypass duties has alienated businesses reliant on low-cost Chinese imports, further isolating the U.S. from global trade norms. Trump's team remains defiant. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Advisor Peter Navarro insist the tariffs are non-negotiable, framing them as a reordering of global trade. Yet this stance risks alienating even sympathetic partners, as evidenced by Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese calling the tariffs not the act of a friend. The US's unilateralism contrasts starkly with China's multilateral outreach, amplifying perceptions of American retreat. China's global free trade system, to mitigate the risks of a global recession induced by Trump's sweeping tariffs globally. There is an absolute need for China to cooperate with the other affected countries to maintain the global multilateral free trade system running and operating, to keep the world from diving into a recession because of Trump's tariffs. The tariffs have accelerated Beijing's push to lead a reformed trade order, leveraging its economic clout and diplomatic agility. China's huge manufacturing capacity, consumer market, with the Belt and Road Initiative BRI, already spanning over 140 countries, serves as a backbone, with new trade pacts layered atop its infrastructure investments. China's strategy hinges on reliability and scale. Unlike the U.S., whose tariffs signal unpredictability, China offers stable access to its vast market and manufacturing base. This appeal resonates with Western firms and governments seeking alternatives amid Trump's trade war. The EU Chamber of Commerce in China noted that supply chain restructuring to avoid U.S.-China tensions is no longer viable overnight, pushing companies toward deeper integration with China. Beijing has also intensified efforts within multilateral forums. At the World Trade Organization (WTO), China has challenged U.S. tariffs, aligning with Canada and others to portray the U.S. as a rule breaker. While the WTO's dispute mechanism remains sluggish, China's rhetoric gains traction among developing nations wary of U.S. dominance. Concurrently, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership (RCEP), encompassing 15 Asia-Pacific countries, positions China as a free trade hub, contrasting with the US's absence from such blocs. The West, though cautious, is not immune to China's overtures. Germany's automotive sector, facing U.S. tariffs on exports, may find China's market more appealing. Italy's wine and fashion industries, hit by a 20% U.S. duty, could pivot eastward. Even the UK, seeking a post-Brexit U.S. deal, may reconsider as Trump's policies falter. China's promise of tariff reductions and investment sweeteners could gradually erode Western cohesion, drawing them into a China-led orbit. For the U.S., self-isolation looms unless Trump recalibrates. The tariffs' economic toll, higher costs, market losses, and strained alliances could force concessions, as hinted by Lutnick's fleeting mentions of negotiations with Canada and Mexico. Yet Trump's intransigence, echoed in his April 5 Truth Social post deriding China's response as wrong, suggests a prolonged standoff, deepening U.S. detachment from global trade networks. Conclusion: China's retaliation to Trump's April 2, 2025, tariffs marks a pivotal moment in global trade. Through targeted tariffs, export controls, and new alliances, Beijing has not only countered U.S. pressure but also positioned itself as a linchpin of an emerging free trade system. As the U.S. risks self-isolation amid economic turmoil and diplomatic fallout, China's strategic pivot offers a tantalizing alternative. Thank you for watching. We need your support to continue bringing you the latest news, analysis, and live information. Please give us your support, smash the like button, comment, share and subscribe to all. Click on the links below to view and purchase my book. Thank you for your support.